Russia is currently ratcheting up its military activities in the Arctic to a, quote, startling degree. That's the view of Katarzyna Zisk, an expert on Russian current affairs at the Norwegian Defense University College. But why now? After all, the war in Ukraine has been raging for nearly 2 years and is becoming more attritional and resource-draining by the week. A report from Reuters suggests that Russia has already suffered losses to the tune of 315,000 dead or injured troops. To put that into historical context, the U.S. is estimated to have lost around 58,000 troops during the whole of the 20-year Vietnam conflict. Anyone would think that Russian President Vladimir Putin would have his hands full with a war that seems to be spiraling further out of his control. What exactly has Russia got to gain from increasing its military presence in the Arctic when it's already embroiled in fierce fighting on the other side of the world? The answer to that question is to draw the battle lines for the next geopolitical conflict of the next 20 to 30 years. But make no mistake, the strategic importance of the Arctic region cannot be understated. Heather Conley of the Center for Strategic International Studies, or CSIS, has gone so far as to say, the country that controls the Arctic controls the world. In actual fact, Arctic dominance has been on Vladimir Putin's mind as far back as 2007. As part of his long-term economic vision, the Russian president has pledged a staggering 20 billion euros to the project. According to Conley's colleagues at the CSIS, these ambitious expansion plans in the Arctic have 3 primary objectives. Firstly, Russia wants to boost its national defense against hostile invasion. From Genghis Khan to Adolf Hitler, the vast country is no stranger to enemy forces threatening its borders. More pertinently, Russia isn't the only country interested in the Arctic region. An area of such immense strategic importance and vast natural resources will always be a magnet for international investment, and all that comes with it. And Russia's interests in that regard must be defended at all costs. Secondly, the country needs to secure its own economic future. Crippled by sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine, Russia desperately needs to redirect its commercial activities away from the West. They aim to do so by opening up the Northern Sea Route, a shipping lane that runs between Norway and Alaska, from the Bering Strait in the east to the Kara Gate in the west, covering approximately 5,600 kilometers. But more on that later. Thirdly, Russia wants to plunder the vast natural resources in the North Atlantic region for its domestic economic purposes. Let's take a look at each point in more detail. Over the last 10 to 15 years, Russia's updated and kitted out many military bases and airfields in the Arctic region. We're talking 50 old Soviet-era military posts, 10 radar stations, 13 air bases, 20 border outposts, and 10 integrated emergency rescue stations. They now have fully operational and manned facilities on Wrangel Island, Kotelny Island, Tixi, Alexandra Land, Novaya Zemlya, and the Kola Peninsula. All of these bases are equipped with some seriously advanced radar and monitoring systems, most notably Sopka 2 on Wrangel Island, which is only 300 miles from Alaska. With an automated solid-state 3-axis dual-purpose tracking system and high-resolution ability, Sopka 2 can identify individual air targets flying in groups. Complete with a protective antenna dome, the system can work in any weather conditions, including the high winds and heavy snow of the Arctic, making it the perfect first line of defense in the region. With such sophisticated anti-aircraft and coastal defense systems, Russia can not only safeguard its nuclear forces, but detect any hostile threat that might encroach upon its territories. To emphasize the point, the bases at Kotelny Island and Novaya Zemlya have second strike capabilities to deny land access by sea and air to NATO or US forces, all of which is overseen by Russia's powerful Northern Fleet. Stationed in Severomorsk on the Kola Peninsula in the western Arctic, the Pride of Russia's Navy patrols the northwest region of the country, as well as the Arctic Ocean, securing Russia's northern coastline. But what does the Northern Fleet bring to the table in terms of military hardware? 2 words: nuclear submarines. Most recently, in January of last year, the Generalissimus Suvorov, the country's newest nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, was transported to an Arctic base. Ever since the Cold War, Russia's fleet of nuclear submarines, or silent killers, have always been game-changers in terms of destructive capabilities. The Generalissimus Suvorov is no exception. The vessel carries up to 16 nuclear-tipped Russia Bulava missiles. To put that into the proper context, each of those missiles can carry more than 1 nuclear warhead. To back up Russia's nuclear deterrent, they're currently building more 4th-generation strategic submarines of the Bory class for deployment in the Arctic region. At present, 3 have already been completed, with 5 more in different stages of construction. Besides nuclear submarines, the Northern Fleet boasts torpedo submarines, missile-carrying and anti-submarine aircraft, surface ships with missiles, and a substantial number of coastal troops from the Russian Air Force, Air Defense Force, and ground forces. But it's not just about bolstering Russian defenses in the Arctic region, situated around 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole, with temperatures that drop below -50. The Arctic is one of the most inhospitable regions in the world, all of which makes it the ideal location to train troops and test weapons. Back in October last year, the New York Times claimed that Russia was preparing to test a nuclear-powered cruise missile with a projected range of thousands of miles, namely the Burevestnik, or SSC-X9 Skyfall, a missile that could potentially target prominent sites on mainland America. Then there's the Poseidon II-M39 torpedo, what many consider to be an ace up Putin's sleeve. While still officially in the testing and trial phase, this unmanned stealth torpedo is powered by a nuclear reactor and capable of sneaking along the seafloor past even the most advanced coastal defenses. With a warhead packed with multiple megatons, the torpedo could cause devastating damage to the region. A recent CNN report claimed that the Poseidon II-M39 torpedo may create radioactive waves that could result in huge areas of the targeted coastline being uninhabitable for generations to come. And there's more. A whole new arsenal of weapons, strategic militaristic game changers, including anti-ship hypersonic cruise missiles, bombers, and MiG-31BM jets. No wonder Katarzyna Zysk called Russia's activities startling. Naturally, none of this has escaped the notice of the US and their allies. Back in 2022, America announced a new Arctic strategy to counter Russia's North Atlantic expansion. Like their predecessors, the Biden administration fully appreciates the geopolitical importance of the region. Currently, there are 22,000 US troops, 12 cruise ships, and dozens of F-35 fighter jets stationed at different bases. Russian Admiral Alexander Moisaev, head of Russia's Northern Fleet, claims there haven't been so many of their forces here for years, decades, not since World War II. However, the vast distances involved in militarizing the Arctic region shouldn't be discounted from the equation. In this respect, the U.S. forces have encountered numerous logistical problems. For instance, U.S. destroyers are powered by gas turbine engines. These maritime leviathans use an incredible amount of fuel, and there's no refueling post for about 2,000 miles. But if we're going to talk logistics, we have to mention one salient fact. The U.S. base in Alaska is only 88 miles from the Russian mainland. And having been invaded so many times throughout history, that is something Russia will never discount or take lightly. Let us not forget that one of the main reasons Russia invaded Ukraine was NATO expansion into Central and Eastern Europe. Naturally, with two great global superpowers establishing huge military presences in the Arctic, tensions will rise from time to time. Routinely, Russian planes have reportedly encroached in U.S. no-fly zones, making their pilots scramble to defend their territories. No more than posturing, but a dangerous game to play when geopolitical stakes are so high. But it hasn't always been like this. In the past, the 8 Arctic states – Canada, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, the US, and Russia – cooperated through the Arctic Council. Founded in 1996, the Council held biannual meetings to discuss the fate of the indigenous communities in the area and plan scientific research projects such as sustainable development, environmental protection, climate change, oil and gas exploration, and Arctic shipping. However, like so many global initiatives, the other member states refused to participate in the last planned and Russian-chaired meeting on March 3, 2022, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Where that leaves the organization now is hard to tell. Russia certainly isn't going to stop in its efforts to annex Ukraine anytime soon. And what about the economic factors involved in Russia's expansion into the Arctic region? As mentioned, the country has been crippled economically by the sanctions imposed by the West due to the conflict in Ukraine. True, Putin has brokered some interesting partnerships with other countries. The Telegraph newspaper in the UK reported on some significant deals with China, India, and Turkey, but they're never going to be enough to support an economy as large as Russia. The solution? Putin's long-term economic vision is focused on opening a new maritime passageway for high-level trade, the Northern Sea Route, or NSR. According to the Moscow Times, the Russian president has called the development of the route one of the obvious strategic priorities. The advantages are many-fold, and if they do not solve Russia's economic issues completely, then they certainly go a long way to easing the burden inflicted upon the country by the debilitating sanctions. But what does Putin want to achieve ultimately? Is he planning to turn the NSR into the new Suez Canal? And if so, is opening this gateway between Northern Europe and Asia a realizable objective? Well, first and foremost, there are many logistical benefits to consider. most notably the distances involved. In comparison to the traditional southern logistics corridors, they are much shorter. Cargo Partner estimates that the distance between ports in northern Europe and Asia could be reduced by up to 40%. Additionally, there will be no bottlenecks or queues when passing through this route, which are common problems associated with more traditional trade routes. But that's not to say the construction of the corridor will be straightforward. Far from it. For hundreds of years, the Arctic waters were icebound and unnavigable. There simply wasn't a way to get through the floating pack ice 3 or 4 meters thick with 20-meter thick ridges. That's where Putin has found an unlikely ally: global warming. Due to a dramatic increase in temperatures across the world, the once unconquerable Arctic ice sheets have started to melt at what many see as an unprecedented rate. The melt is moving faster than scientists predicted or thought possible several years ago, said one senior State Department official. It's going to be a dramatic transformation in the decades ahead in terms of physical access. Nature has played a big role in presenting this opportunity to Russia, and it's an opportunity Putin is determined not to miss out on. But even with the help of what many feel is an environmental catastrophe, some serious kit is needed to plow a way through the remaining ice sheets and open up that much-vaunted northern sea route. Enter the icebreakers. Russia has more than 40 in total, far more than any of the other Arctic states. The United States only currently has 2 operational icebreakers in its arsenal. All have been transported to the Arctic region to punch a way through the remaining ice sheets. They serve a dual purpose, however. Firstly, they can play a crucial part in securing Russia's coastline. Some vessels carry Caliber cruise missiles and electronic warfare systems. But more importantly, they can help carve out and police the northern sea route. The jewel in the crown of the fleet will undoubtedly be the Chukotka, even if it won't be ready for active service until 2026. Powered by 2 new RITM-200 reactors, it'll be the 4th nuclear-powered icebreaker of the 22-220 project. Weighing in at 147.5 tons and with a thermal capacity of 175 megawatts, it's twice as light and 1.5 times more compact and more powerful than older reactors, all of which will enhance the Chukotka's speed and ice-crossing abilities. To put that potency into context, it'll be capable of bashing its way through the ice up to 3 meters thick. That is some serious destructive power. Encouragingly, the operation has already started to produce results for the man who holds the keys to the Kremlin. Rosatom, the state nuclear energy corporation, reported that 31.4 million tons of cargo traffic passed via the northern sea route between January and October last year. That is a staggering 10 times the amount compared to a decade or so ago. But as highlighted, the nuclear icebreaker fleet won't just be charged with icebreaking activities and navigation of the northern sea route, whether for transit purposes or domestic voyages. They'll also be responsible for delivering essential goods as part of the rapidly evolving northern delivery system. But to take full advantage of the situation, the Russians will have to add to their current fleet. This really is a case of necessity being the mother of creation. Malte Humpert, founder of the U.S. think tank the Arctic Institute, said, "Russia doesn't have much alternative. The European market is off limits. It needs to produce oil and gas and export to get money. And buyers are now in Asia." By opening up a crucial northern maritime route linking Asia and Europe, Putin has gone some way to addressing Russia's economic isolation. Time will only tell how effective the northern sea route will be in the long term, but early indications suggest that Putin has rolled the geopolitical dice to benefit Russia for years to come. And then there's the question of Russia's vast energy reserves to consider, of which the rich natural resources of the Arctic are most certainly included. It's no secret that Putin's close advisors have predicted a serious global energy crisis in the not-too-distant future, maybe as soon as 2030. If the Northern Sea Route and exporting its natural resources to Asia is part of the solution for Russia, then tapping into the other rich natural resources found in the Arctic is another crucial factor. As Katarzyna Zysk observed, since the early 2000s, the Russian political and military leadership has systematically argued that there will be an acute shortage of energy resources worldwide, which may lead to a conflict, and that the West, led by the United States, may attempt to seize Russia's oil and gas. But is that a real and terrifying possibility? Could war break out with the sole intention of seizing Russia's vast natural resources? And would that war ultimately take place in the Arctic region? In recent years, the energy question has been at the forefront of the political debate. Even Western countries with former powerhouse economies have found themselves in positions that would have seemed inconceivable 20 or 30 years ago. Both Germany and France have been forced to completely rethink their short, medium, and long-term energy policies. with the former resolve to no longer rely on Russian gas to satisfy its demands. As Putin said, therefore, the Arctic expansion is obvious and makes perfect sense for Russia. They need to protect their borders, open up trade routes with non-hostile nations in Asia, and secure their own energy supplies for years to come. But what about the other big players on the global scene? What about China, for instance? How does Beijing view Russia's military and economic expansion in the Arctic region? Well, it would be safe to say that China is playing the long game. In recent years, they've made strategic alliances with other members of the Arctic Alliance, including Iceland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, the U.S. state of Alaska, and Russia. In many ways, the Arctic is a buyer's market, and not many buyers have the same economic clout as China. Rumblings out of Beijing suggest that China sees the region, and the Northern Sea Route in particular, as a potential Arctic Great Silk Road. For that reason, Xi Jinping has ensured China is a member of every Arctic and Arctic-related governance body that's come into being in the recent years. With so many natural resources available, resources China desperately needs to fuel its own economy, they will no doubt be at the front of the queue when it comes to exploiting the region to the full. The future of the Arctic is very much in flux, but conquering the region is far from a new idea, especially from Russian perspectives. You can chart this back to the Soviet times and beyond. During his leadership, Joseph Stalin saw something symbolic of the country's national identity and adventurous spirit in taming such a snowy wilderness and planting the red flag firmly on Arctic soil. In his famous Red Arctic propaganda campaign, countless posters and proclamations were made in the Soviet press, attesting to the heroism of the teams that explored the regions in the 1930s and 40s. Even then, the Russian leadership was fully aware of the Arctic's future geopolitical significance. And if Putin's ultimate aim is to return Russia to its former standing before the collapse of the Soviet Union, in effect redrawing the boundaries of modern-day Europe and beyond, the war in Ukraine and dominance in the Arctic will no doubt prove to be key factors. So the battle lines are most definitely being drawn. Vast military resources and manpower have been transported to the Arctic region, and a new trading route that links Europe to Asia has literally been carved out of the once impassable ice sheets. No one could accuse Vladimir Putin of being short-sighted. His vision for long-term expansion in the region is already starting to bear fruit, and that might be a worrying prospect for the West. Many international observers were hugely critical of Putin. They felt his prediction of a quick and decisive victory in Ukraine was not only seriously wide of the mark, but conceited and arrogant. However, Putin is nothing if not a canny and pragmatic leader. Rather than panic, he now appears to happily exercise patience and continue to plan for the long term. Did he underestimate the impact Western intervention would have on the war in Ukraine? Did he not realize how much military hardware would be pledged from the likes of the US and the UK to prop up Kyiv's defenses? Probably. But he was quick to realign the country's goals and push on to what is arguably a much bigger prize: Arctic dominance and all that goes with it. The numbers speak for themselves. Russia currently has the fifth largest military force in the world. In terms of active personnel, we're talking around 830,000 troops. Back in August of 2022, Putin signed a decree which will in effect increase that number to over 2 million. Where exactly they'll be deployed is another question altogether. Will the war still be raging in Ukraine, or will the Russian government look to further bolster their forces in the Arctic? It should be noted that some troops actively deployed in the region were recently transferred to Ukraine to support Russian advances. But how long that'll be the case is a matter up for serious debate. According to a report from CBC's Russian correspondent Briar Stewart, Ukraine is experiencing chronic shortages in ammunition, troops, and military hardware, a worrying combination at any point of a conflict. But how serious is that problem exactly? And will it ultimately impact how long the war will last? With the war about to enter its third year, something many saw as unthinkable when Russia launched its aggressive invasion back in 2022, Ukraine badly needs to reset and rethink its current strategy. Tim Willesee-Wilsey of the War Studies Department at King's College London made the following grim prediction. It leaves Ukraine having to fight a defensive position with insufficient resources. I think most people estimate that Ukraine could hold out in 2024, but that leaves a big question about 2025. All of which could play right into Putin's hands and bring about a favorable end to the conflict sooner rather than later. Despite Ukraine's efforts to push Russia back in the south and east of the country, if Ukraine can no longer hold out despite Western intervention, Russia will be able to recalibrate its longer-term plans accordingly. Ultimately, Russia is determined to conquer the North Atlantic region and beyond. They're starting to stake greater claims to larger swaths of territory on land and sea than any of the other countries that formed the Arctic Alliance. They have more military bases than NATO, more icebreakers than the US, and a fearsome number of nuclear submarines to patrol the Arctic waters. It'll be interesting to see how the escalation of their military plans in the region plays out in the coming months and years, especially as there doesn't seem to be any end to the conflict with Ukraine in sight. And with that, we'd like to invite you to tell us what you think about Russia ramping up its military activities in the Arctic. Will the combination of Northern Sea Route and the Arctic region's vast resources be enough to save Russia's sanction-hit economy? What do you make of Russia's growing nuclear deterrent? Do you think the US would declare war in an attempt to get their hands on Russian territory? Let us know your opinions both on Russian expansion in the Arctic and how you think the West might react in the comments section below.